The chicken was cold. Not fridge-cold, trash-can cold. I stared down at the plate in front of me, the shriveled, grayish meat sitting next to mushy peas and a clump of half-burnt rice. The bitter tang of spoiled fat wafted up with the steam she'd tried to force from the microwave, and I knew without tasting it this had been in the garbage. "Eat up, Mom," Marissa said sweetly, standing over me with her arms crossed. "We don't waste food in this house." She smiled, but it wasn't kindness. It was triumph. A strange, quiet cruelty hidden behind perfect teeth and passive-aggressive warmth. I looked up at her tall, glowing, young, and I wondered how my son had married a woman who could serve this to the woman who gave him life. "I'm not hungry," I whispered, pushing the plate away. "Oh," she said, eyes widening, as if my reaction surprised her. "But you said you were starving when you walked in." "That was 2 hours ago, back when I rang their doorbell after my power had gone out in the middle of December. I'd driven 30 minutes through slushy roads because my apartment had gone dark and cold, and I hadn't wanted to be alone." My hands still shook from the chill, even after I'd sat beside their fireless electric heater. She'd made me wait. Said dinner was just finishing up. Said she was so glad I came. Then disappeared into the kitchen for 30 minutes. Now, I was staring down at someone else's garbage, scraped together and dressed up as a meal. Not a mistake. A message. I glanced down the hall, hoping maybe James would come out of the bedroom, realize what she'd done, say something. Anything. But he didn't. He never did. It's hard to say the exact moment your child becomes a stranger. I raised James alone. From the day his father packed a suitcase and walked out when James was 5, it was just the two of us. I worked double shifts at the clinic, slept in the car during graveyard rotations, and fed him before feeding myself. Every night, I'd rub his back and say the same thing. "One day, you'll do better than me." He did. I thought I should have been proud. He became a software engineer. Married Marissa 3 years ago, a girl from the suburbs, polished and sharp, the kind who said expensive like it was a compliment. She wore silk robes in the morning and had opinions about how I folded laundry. But I kept my mouth shut. For James. After the wedding, the distance started. At first it was just missed calls, then skipped holidays. Eventually, he'd ask me to text first next time before visiting. I stopped showing up. But when the power cut out and I was too cold to sleep, I let pride die and called. James answered. He sounded distracted, but said, "Of course, Mom. Come over." No hesitation. Marissa must have had other ideas. Now, I sat in her kitchen under a flickering light, my bones still cold, my dignity dissolving in the smell of rotting grease. She sat across from me, sipping red wine. Her plate was clean, she'd already eaten. Probably something hot and fresh before I arrived. "So," she said, stretching the word out like it was tired of being used. "How long's the power been out?" "Since this morning," I said softly. She nodded, smiling into her glass. "You should really call the landlord more often. Or maybe think about moving somewhere a little more modern. Senior housing's come a long way." I bristled. She was younger than James by 2 years. 34. But she spoke to me like I was 80, frail and helpless. I'm 62. I still drive. I still walk to the market, and I still remember how to raise a child even if mine had forgotten. I reached for my coat. "Thank you for having me." "Don't be silly," she said, standing. "You can't drive back tonight, not in this weather. James would kill me." I said nothing. She didn't move to take my plate. Later that night, I lay in the guest room, their home office, with a pull-out couch that smelled like dog, listening to their muffled voices behind the door. She didn't even eat it. "Babe, please, just let it go." I made her a plate. "You pulled it out of the trash, Marissa." A pause. She wasn't supposed to know. Another pause. She always plays the victim. I curled tighter under the thin blanket, biting my lip to stay silent. The words came like razors sharper than cold. And suddenly, all the years I had swallowed for peace flooded my throat like bile. She wasn't supposed to know. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, my hand clenched around the silver crucifix James made in 3rd grade that still hung around my neck. I remembered him at 9, hiding behind me at the supermarket because he was scared of strangers. I remembered every night I skipped dinner so he could have seconds. I remembered the first time he called me Mommy again after his father left. And I thought, this is how he repays me? No, not him. Her. But he lets her. That was worse. In the morning, I rose before they did. made myself a cup of tea with one of her fancy herbal sachets, and sat quietly in the kitchen, waiting, watching the dawn roll in through the frost-smeared window. When Marissa finally shuffled in, wrapped in a cashmere robe, she blinked like she hadn't expected to see me still there. "Oh," she said, smiling. "Morning." "Morning," I replied. She walked past me toward the fridge, opened it, grabbed an avocado, and started slicing it for her toast. I stood up slowly. "I'll be leaving in a bit," I said, "just waiting for the roads to clear." She nodded, not looking up. "You sure? You can stay if you need." A lie. "I'm sure." Another pause. Then I said it. "I know what you did, Marissa." Her hand froze mid-slice. "Excuse me." "I saw the trash," I said. "The takeout container. The same rice. The same chicken. Same spot in the microwave. You didn't even bother to hide it." She turned to face me, her expression a mask smooth, unreadable. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I do," I said, stepping closer. "You serve me garbage. And you smiled while doing it." She scoffed, putting the knife down. "You're being dramatic." "I've been called worse," I said calmly. "But not by someone who lives in a house I helped pay for." Her lips parted, surprise flickering across her face. "Oh, did James not tell you?" I continued. "That down payment 2 years ago, the $20,000 he saved from work? That was my pension. He asked for help, and I gave it. No questions asked." Silence. She blinked. "That's not." "It is," I said. "And I never said a word. I never asked for repayment. I never asked for gratitude. But I won't be insulted in the same house I helped build." She stepped back. "You're twisting things. You're making it into something it's not." I smiled. "Cold. Clean. No. I'm seeing things clearly." Then I took out the envelope I had written the night before, when the darkness in the guest room gave me clarity. I placed it on the table. "What is this?" "My will," I said softly. "Updated. I had it notarized last week, before the storm. You and James were named as primary beneficiaries." Her eyes brightened, then narrowed. "Were." She opened the envelope. "Read." Then paled. "I've left everything, the savings, the pension, the land, to someone else now. A friend who visited me every week this past year, when you two didn't. A woman named Clara. You wouldn't know her. She brings me soup and conversation." Marissa's face flushed. "James won't stand for this. James won't know until I'm gone. And by then, it won't matter." I picked up my coat, walked to the door. "You served me garbage," I said one last time. "So I'll leave you with nothing but that." And I stepped out into the cold, the wind sharper, but my heart lighter. I didn't cry on the drive home. I thought I might. I thought that after everything, I'd pull over on the side of the road and sob for the wasted years, for the cold food, for the son who no longer knew me. But instead, I drove with the heater blasting and my hands steady on the wheel. Sometimes grief doesn't come with tears. Sometimes it comes with clarity. When I got home, the power was still out. My little apartment was still dark, still cold, but it was mine. No smug voices. No venom laced with pleasantries. No scent of rot pretending to be a meal. I boiled water on a camping stove I kept under the sink, a habit from my days in the trailer park, long before I could afford this apartment. I wrapped myself in 3 blankets, sat by the window, and watched the world go on without me. And still, somehow, I felt peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for James to call. I wasn't trying to please anyone. I had nothing left to give, and that, oddly, made me feel full. The next morning, I received a message. From James. "James, hey Mom. Marissa said something happened. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen. 5 hours too late. I didn't respond. By noon, he called. I let it ring. By evening, he texted again. "James, please." I didn't know she did that. "I'm sorry." Now that made me pause. Because I heard his voice that night. I heard him say she pulled the food from the trash. I heard him know. And I heard him do nothing. I wrote back one line. "Me. When you're ready to be my son again, you'll know where to find me." I turned off my phone. Over the next week, something strange happened. For years, I'd been orbiting around James and Marissa's world like a forgotten moon. Calling, texting, offering favors, begging for gravity. But now I stopped. And without that pull, I realized how big my own world could be. I started volunteering again at the shelter downtown, the one I used to bring James to when he was 10, and we had no Christmas plans. I met people who remembered me, who asked how I'd been, who listened when I spoke. Clara, my friend from the building, came by every evening with soup and laughter and stories about her ridiculous cat named Chairman Meow. We played cards, watched old films, shared silence without tension. I felt alive again. Present. I also took the time to clean out the old lockbox under my bed where I kept records, memories, old letters from James written in childish scrawl. And I realized I'd been holding on to every scrap of affection like it was treasure, terrified there wouldn't be more. But maybe it was time to stop hoarding love from the past and make room for love in the present. A week later, James showed up at my door. It was a rainy Tuesday. I heard the knock while I was folding towels. I opened it to find him standing there, soaked and pale, looking like the boy I used to wrap in scarves too big for his face. "Hi," he said quietly. "James," I replied, stepping aside. He entered slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcome. I offered him tea. He said yes. We sat across from each other at my tiny table, and for a while, we just listened to the sound of the rain. "I didn't know," he said finally. "Not really." "You knew enough?" I said gently. He looked down. "I heard her say it," he admitted. "I should have said something. I should have come to you that night." "Why didn't you?" He didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, "Because I didn't know how to choose." My heart squeezed. "I didn't want to make waves," he said. "Marissa, she gets intense. And I thought if I just stayed out of it, it would pass." "It didn't pass," I said. "It hardened." He nodded. "I'm sorry. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But apologies are easy. Change is not." "Did she ask you to come?" I asked. He hesitated. "No. She told me to leave it alone. Said you were being dramatic." I looked out the window. "I'm done being quiet." "I know." We sat in silence again. Then he said something that pierced the quiet like lightning. "Mom, I miss you." A tear did fall then. Just one. Not for sorrow, but for the memory of a boy who used to say that after every sleepover. "I miss you too, James." He started coming by once a week after that. Sometimes just to talk. Sometimes to help fix the cabinet doors that had warped from the cold. He brought groceries, once fresh fruit, the kind I used to pack in his lunchbox. But I didn't change my will. Not yet. I needed time. I needed to know he wasn't just coming out of guilt. Meanwhile, Marissa stayed away. Not a single message. Not a single word. And I didn't seek one either. Then, one day, I received a letter. No return address. Just a clean white envelope slid under my door. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her handwriting. "I know what you did. James doesn't see it, but I do. You're punishing us. You think you're noble, but you're just lonely and bitter. I hope your will keeps you warm at night." I stared at the paper, then laughed. Loudly. It was the first time I'd laughed that hard in years. Because she was wrong. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. That night, I burned the letter in my sink. Not out of rage, but ritual. It felt like shedding skin. Like letting go of something heavy and slimy that had clung to my shoulders for years. Afterward, I sat with my tea, wrapped in my favorite sweater, and thought about what it meant to grow old. Not weaker. Not less. Just refined. Like fire making coal into diamond. And I made a decision. The will would stay as it was for now. But I would write James a letter. Not about money. Not about Marissa. But about who I was before I became just mom. About the girl who wanted to be a painter. About the woman who gave up scholarships to raise him. About the nights I whispered prayers into darkness hoping he'd turn out all right. He deserved to know me, the full me, not the version that lived behind a dinner plate of spoiled leftovers. A month passed. Then two. Spring came early. The cherry blossoms near my building bloomed in a defiant pink, loud and alive. I started walking again, morning strolls with Clara, sharing thermoses of green tea and gossip about our neighbors. James came by every Saturday. He fixed the leaky faucet. He repainted the bathroom. We even made a small herb garden on my balcony. Still, he never brought Marissa. Until the day he did. It was mid-May. I opened the door, and there she stood beside him, dressed in beige, eyes carefully blank. "Hi," she said. I nodded. "Hello." James looked nervous. She wanted to talk. "Did she?" I asked, still holding the door. "I did," Marissa said. "If you'll let me." I considered her for a moment, then stepped aside. We sat in silence for a long time. She didn't drink the tea I offered. She kept smoothing her skirt, like she was prepping for court. Then she finally spoke. "I don't have an excuse." I raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong start." She almost smiled. "Almost." "I was cruel," she said. "Intentionally." I didn't like the way you made James feel guilty about us. I didn't like how close he was to you. I saw it as competition. And now? I asked. Now I see I was trying to erase you. So I wouldn't have to face how small I felt next to the woman who raised him right. That struck something deep. She looked up, and her eyes, usually sharp, were soft. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted to say it to your face, so it wouldn't rot in me. I nodded. Silence stretched. Then I said, You still think I'm bitter? No, she said quickly. I think you're steel. I leaned back in my chair. What changed? She looked at James. He did. And then, so quietly, I almost missed it. You made him strong enough to stand up to me. That was the moment I knew the war was over. Not because I'd won, but because someone else had chosen peace. Marissa sat still for a long time after that. I watched her face, how the tension began to settle around her jaw, but didn't quite let go. There was something behind her eyes, not regret, exactly, but weariness. Maybe it came from living with the image of herself she didn't like. Maybe it came from losing control. I stood up and refilled my teacup. I didn't ask if she wanted any more. You can visit, I said finally. You can come with James. But if you ever treat me with disrespect again in my house, or as I'll walk away for good. And I won't look back. I don't care how many years we've known each other. I don't care who's married to who. She swallowed. Hard. I understand. And don't confuse politeness with reconciliation, I added. Forgiveness isn't a handshake. It's a process. For the first time, she looked relieved by something I said. I don't expect to be your daughter, she said. Or your friend. No, I agreed. But you could be someone I don't flinch to share a room with. She gave a tight smile. That's fair. James had been silent the whole time. Now he let out a long breath and looked like he'd aged backward 5 years. He didn't speak, just gave me a long, grateful look. Then we had lunch, something simple. I made a pot of soup. Real soup. Warm, filling. Food that hadn't come from a garbage can. I served them bowls and cracked pepper over the top the way I used to for James when he was little. They both ate quietly. I didn't say anything about how they both went back for seconds. Weeks passed. Marissa came by twice more. Always with James. Always careful, restrained, almost formal but not false. There was no sweetness in her tone anymore, no syrup over poison. Just a woman trying to do better. And I appreciated that more than any forced apology. One Sunday, we were planting more herbs on the balcony. James had brought rosemary, and Marissa was gently patting soil around basil sprouts. Clara stopped by with a basket of fresh tomatoes from the community garden. Oh, I didn't know you had company, she said brightly. James stood up and smiled. You must be Clara. I've heard a lot about you. Clara gave me a sideways glance and a sly grin. All good things, I hope. They are now, I said, and we all laughed. It felt normal. Not perfect, not fake, but a moment I could live inside without flinching. Later that night, when they left, Marissa turned back at the door. Thank you for not shutting me out, she said. I almost did, I replied. But you knocked. That matters. That night, I pulled out the letter I'd been writing to James. I had started it a month ago, the day I told him I wanted him to know who I really was. The woman behind the mother. But every time I thought I'd finished it, something changed. A feeling, a memory, a moment that needed adding. Now, I opened the last page and wrote the final paragraph. And if you're reading this someday, after I'm gone, I want you to know that loving you was never the mistake. The mistake was forgetting I had a name before you. Thank you for helping me remember it. I signed it simply. Love. Elaine. Then I tucked it into a sealed envelope and placed it in the same folder as my will. A new document now updated again, written not out of anger, but awareness. James was back in it. So was Clara. And so, surprisingly, was Marissa. Not because I felt I owed her, but because I believe people should be rewarded when they choose growth. Especially when it's hard. Especially when no one is watching. It was a summer evening when everything came full circle. I had just returned from the community center, where I taught a crochet class to a group of teenagers who reminded me that patience isn't just a virtue, it's a weapon. My apartment smelled like lavender and old books. The sun was setting in a streak of gold across my tiny living room. And then, the phone rang. Not a message. Not a text. A real call. From James. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. He sounded different. Light. In a way I hadn't heard in years. We're having a dinner next week, he said. At our place. Nothing fancy. Just food. Real food. We'd love if you came. I hesitated. then asked, "Will it be warm?" He laughed deep, honest. "Fresh off the stove." I smiled. "Then I'll be there." And I meant it. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and baked sweet potatoes. This time, the food was fresh. I stood in the doorway of James and Marissa's dining room and took in the scene, the table neatly set with real silverware, linen napkins, a centerpiece of white tulips. And at the head of the table, they'd placed a seat with a soft cushion. For me. "You didn't have to do all this," I said quietly. "We wanted to," James replied, ushering me in. "Really?" Marissa appeared from the kitchen wearing an apron and carrying a bowl of warm rolls. She didn't force a smile. She just nodded and said, "Hope you're hungry." I was. I hadn't expected to be. Something about being in this house again, in this space where betrayal had once lingered like a bad smell, made my skin feel strange, like old wounds itching beneath new skin. But as I sat down and saw how carefully the table had been laid, I knew they weren't pretending this time. This wasn't a show. It was a step. We ate in peace. The conversation didn't come in a rush. It flowed gently, like a river just thawing after winter. James asked about my herb garden, and Marissa asked about the shelter. We spoke about Clara, about her new dog. She'd caved and adopted another one, a shaggy brown mutt she named Pancake, and I told them about the teen who gifted me a drawing last week, a sketch of my hands, wrinkled but strong. "You should frame it," Marissa said. "I think I will," I replied. For a moment, I caught her eyes. There was no resentment there, no bitterness, just something tentative, something trying. After dinner, James poured us all a glass of wine. He raised his glass and cleared his throat. I just wanted to say thank you for coming and for giving us another chance. I know we didn't deserve it at first, but we're trying. We really are." He looked at Marissa. She nodded, her expression serious. "I never want you to feel unwanted in our home again," she said softly. "Never again." I didn't speak for a moment. I let their words sink in, let the silence stretch. Then I raised my glass. "To doing better," I said, "even if it's late." After dinner, while James washed dishes, Marissa came out to the patio where I was sipping tea under a string of lights. The air was warm. The sky above the suburbs was a dark velvet, stars faint but real. "I meant what I said," she told me, sitting in the chair beside me, "about not wanting you to feel unwanted." I nodded. "I know." She fidgeted for a moment, then said, "I've been in therapy." That surprised me. "Good for you," I said gently. "I didn't go because of you," she added quickly. "I mean, I started because of other things. Pressure, expectations, stuff I hadn't unpacked. But it led me to realize how cruel I'd been, especially to you." She looked down at her hands. "I thought I had to be the only woman James relied on. I thought if he turned to you, it meant he didn't need me, that I wasn't enough." "You were scared," I said. She looked up. "And angry," I added. "And prideful. But underneath all that, you were scared." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry, just nodded. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not humiliating me, for not telling everyone. I'm not interested in revenge, Marissa." "I know. That's what makes it worse. You were better to me than I deserved." I paused, then leaned in slightly. "No one starts off deserving love. We learn to earn it by how we treat people. You're learning. So keep going." She nodded, wiped one cheek. Then we sat together, just the two of us, under the warm buzz of patio lights. Not as mother and daughter-in-law, not even as friends, just two women who had done harm and survived it. In the weeks that followed, something rare happened. Peace held. There were no backslides, no veiled jabs, no doors closed in my face. Instead, Marissa started sending small texts now and then, a picture of a new dish she was trying, a recipe she thought I'd like. James started stopping by on his lunch breaks, bringing flowers or fruit from the farmer's market. One day, he came alone, holding a box. "Thought you'd want this," he said, handing it to me. Inside was a stack of old sketchbooks mine. I gasped. "Where did you find these?" "In your old closet, buried under boxes. I think you used to keep them back when I was in middle school." I flipped one open. My breath caught. There were the pencil sketches I'd drawn in college before I dropped out to raise James. Faces, flowers, cityscapes from dreams I never chased. "I used to love these," I murmured. "I thought they were gone." He smiled. "You should draw again." "I don't know if I still can." "Maybe it doesn't matter," he said. "Maybe it's just about doing it." His voice was quiet, encouraging, familiar. And in that moment, I remembered who I was to him. Not a burden, not a mistake, a mother. That night, I pulled out my favorite pencil, the one I'd kept all these years, dulled and cracked, and sharpened it with a knife. I turned to a fresh page, and I drew. First, the outline of a small herb garden, sunlight spilling over clay pots. Then a wrinkled hand, fingers curled around basil leaves. Then a boy's face, James at 10, looking up in wonder. The lines were shaky at first, but they smoothed. They remembered me. I hadn't been forgotten. One day, Clara and I were sitting on the balcony drinking mint tea when she said, "You've changed." I raised an eyebrow. "Not in a bad way," she added quickly. "You're brighter. Less heavy." I smiled. I let go of something. Anger. No. Fear. She sipped her tea and nodded. Fear of what? Fear that I'd never matter again. Later that week, I took the train downtown. Not for an errand. Not to help anyone else. Just for myself. I visited the local art co-op. Asked about classes. Bought 2 new sketch pads and a set of charcoal pencils. The young woman behind the counter smiled when I said I hadn't drawn in decades. "It never leaves you," she said. And I believed her. It was mid-July when I got the call. James again. This time, his voice was breathless. "She's pregnant." I froze. "Who?" "Marissa. We just found out." A long pause. Then, almost shyly, he added, "She wants you to be part of it." I didn't say anything. Not for a long time. Then, with a lump in my throat and a tear threatening to spill, I said, "I'd like that." Because this time, it wasn't guilt calling me. It was legacy. The first time I heard the baby's heartbeat, I cried. Not the soft, discreet tears of polite joy. No, this was the kind of crying that came from a place deeper than memory. From somewhere inside my chest that had been waiting to feel useful again, loved again, present again. Marissa held my hand during the appointment. She didn't say anything, and neither did I, but when the sound filled the small exam room, that frantic, tiny drumming of life, our fingers intertwined naturally. Not out of forgiveness, out of something quieter. A new trust, fragile as lace, but there. She was 6 weeks along. Morning sickness, hormonal swings, back pain already starting. I brought her ginger tea the next day and rubbed her shoulders while James made dinner. It felt like we were all trying. And for once not out of obligation. "Have you thought of names?" I asked one day while we folded tiny newborn clothes they'd bought prematurely. "Not yet," she said, still letting it settle. "I kept a journal of baby names when I was pregnant with James," I offered, a little shy. "Most of them were ridiculous." She smiled. "I'd love to see it." So I showed her. And for the first time, she laughed, not politely, not distantly, but with warmth. Loud, open laughter when she read names like Storm and D'Artagnan. "You were so young," she said, flipping through pages I'd almost forgotten existed. "Terrified," I replied, "but hopeful. Hope is sometimes louder than fear." She grew quiet at that. Then she whispered, "I've been both." James had started to call every evening. Just short conversations. Sometimes we talked about the baby. Sometimes he told me about work, about stress, about how Marissa was craving mangoes and crying during car commercials. Once, he asked me something that caught me off guard. "Were you ever scared I'd leave you?" I didn't know how to answer at first. "I was scared you'd forget me," I said. He was silent for a long time. "I almost did," he said. "But you came back." "I'm not leaving again," he promised. I believed him. By the time Marissa entered her 3rd trimester, something had shifted. She started calling me on her own, not just for baby advice, but for me. She asked how I was feeling, what I was drawing, what I liked to read. She invited me to prenatal yoga, and even though I felt absurd trying to stretch my hips beside a row of glowing 20 and 30-somethings, I went. Because it mattered to her. Because she was making room for me in her world. One afternoon, after class, we sat in her car while the summer rain hammered the roof, and she said, "You know, I used to be jealous of you." I turned, surprised. "Why?" "You're strong," she said simply. And I thought strength was a threat. "It's not," I said. "It's an invitation. But not everyone's ready to take it. I am now." The nursery was a soft yellow. The crib had little stars carved into the wood. I sewed a blanket. Nothing fancy. Just patches from old fabric I had saved, a shirt James wore at 5, a piece of my mother's apron, a square from the curtain in our old kitchen. Every stitch felt like reclaiming time. When I gave it to Marissa at the baby shower, she didn't just thank me. She hugged me. and this time meant it. The baby came in the middle of October. A girl, 7 pounds, 11 ounces, full head of dark hair and lungs strong enough to shake the hospital walls. James called me from the delivery room. His voice cracked when he said, "She's here, Mom. She's here." They named her Eleanor. Not after me, but after my grandmother. My mother's mother. A name I had spoken so many times to James when he was little. A name rooted in strength, in endurance, in warmth. I came to the hospital the next morning. When Marissa placed Eleanor in my arms, my hands shook. The baby blinked up at me like she knew. Like something inside her had waited for this moment. "She looks like you," Marissa said softly. "She feels like home," I whispered. And I rocked her. And rocked her. And everything in the world felt right. Eleanor grew quickly. Every week brought a new sound, a new stretch of fingers, a new laugh. I started watching her once a week so Marissa could rest. Then it became 2 days. Then 3. Soon, I was there more often than not. "Thank you," Marissa said one day, watching me bounce Eleanor in the kitchen while soup simmered behind me. "For everything." I looked at her and saw not the girl who once served me trash, but a woman who had grown up beside me, through me, because of me, and in spite of me. "We saved each other," I said, "whether we meant to or not." She smiled. "You saved me more." At Eleanor's first birthday, we had a garden party. James grilled. Marissa baked a cake shaped like a sunflower. Clara brought her ridiculous dog, and Eleanor tried to ride it like a pony. And at one point, as the sun dipped behind the trees, James stood and clinked a glass. "I just want to say something," he said. "A year ago, I thought I knew what family was. I thought it was something you protect by keeping parts of it quiet. Safe. Clean." He paused, looked at me. "But family isn't safety," he said. "It's honesty. It's work. It's grace. And it's never too late to come back to it." He raised his glass toward me. "To the woman who taught me how to come home." Everyone clapped. I cried openly, unashamed. Even Marissa wiped her eyes. That night, after the guests had gone and Eleanor had fallen asleep on my chest, Marissa leaned her head against my shoulder. "She loves you so much." "I love her too. She's going to grow up knowing you," she said. I smiled down at the sleeping baby. "And I'll grow old knowing her." That winter, I updated my will one last time. It included everything I had left: my savings, my pension, my art. But what I added at the top was more important than what I left behind. This is not a record of what I've lost. It's a record of what I've built. A life that did not end in bitterness. A family that broke and healed again. And a child who will know her grandmother not as a visitor, but as a legacy. Sometimes I still think about that plate of food. The gray chicken. The sour peas. The silence. It could have been the end. But it wasn't. Because even garbage can grow something new if you bury it deep, let it decompose, and plant something honest in its place. I was served trash, but I turned it into a garden. And in that garden, I bloomed.